Hi, I'm Taylor Haase. This is Danny Shirey. We are coming to you live from day 2 of Penguins training camp at the UPMC Lemieux Complex in Cranberry. Day 2, we finally got to talk to Ron Hextall for the first time during training camp. And obviously the first question is, do you have a plan to get salary cap compliant before the start of the season? And I thought his answer was a little interesting. It's that they don't currently have a plan. That doesn't mean they haven't thought about it or they really don't know what their options are. It's just that there are a lot of options, and it seems like a lot of spots are up for grabs. A lot is left in the open. Trade. He didn't rule out trade as a possibility, but then they also don't have to make a trade. A lot of what they can do is just sending players down, maybe on waivers, maybe without waivers, and getting cap compliant that way. But it did seem like a lot of those spots, especially the depth spots, are, can be won in this training camp. Did you get that sense?
Yeah, I mean, Hextall was very non-committal about, his roster or even the lineup going into opening night. We do know that the Penguins could become cap compliant if both of Drew O'Connor and Ty Smith, who are waivers exempt, start the season down in the AHL. Hextall was asked if those guys are maybe at a disadvantage going into this season, and you could tell it, the look on his face, like he knows the deal. All the armchair GMs on Twitter, he knows everything that they know as well. So the look on his face kind of indicated that he at least knows that's one of his backup options if nothing else happens. But he also said that they still want to put the best lineup out there that they can, and that if those guys really push and force the issue so much that they're not destined for the AHL to start the season if that's what ends up happening. We also had the opportunity to talk to Mike Sullivan today, and I asked him about Kasperi Kapanen's season last year and why he thought that he struggled so much for large portions of the season, and then what he's going to need to do this season to improve upon that. And Sullivan, he said he didn't have an answer as to why Kapanen struggled for portions of last season, but one of the things that really stood out to me was that he said that he needs to do a better job of coaching Kapanen. So that tells me that, Sullivan's been trying maybe talking to him a certain way or just maybe like a hard luck or hard love kind of coaching style that maybe Kapanen isn't really, or maybe Kapanen doesn't really receive that all that well. So it sounds like, if nothing else, that Sullivan's going to tinker and try around with, the way he communicates and coaches Kapanen this season. So I'm going to be looking out to see, if there's any tangible changes that come from that.
Yeah, I thought Sullivan, he had a good thing to say about Radim Zohorna too. Zohorna's one of those guys who it is going to be tough for them to make the roster. He does need waivers. This is his first year of waiver eligibility, but I still think just given the current depth options they have, you could probably sneak him through waivers, put him in Wilkes-Barre to start. But something Sullivan did say is that, it does seem like he is playing with more pace. He has maybe picked up a step, but then also just his fitness level is the best Sullivan's seen it so far, which is something they had been pushing to see from him. Ever since Zohorna first got his shot up in the NHL, Sullivan did say it's his, not necessarily his ability to play with pace to start, but just maintain that pace over the course of a game is something that was a challenge for Zohorna earlier on. And that's just being a bigger guy. That's something a lot of those guys have to learn how to do, make that adjustment. Zohorna also, I feel like a lot of people forget, he came in last training camp sick. He didn't know what he had, but he didn't feel right for like a month. And then even when he did come back, it was like he was playing catch up. So he was behind the 8 ball to start. So for Zohorna to come in healthy and feeling maybe added to his fitness level, that's huge.
And he's been noticeable too. This isn't something that Sullivan just said for a quote for a story somebody's writing. It was something that we've all noticed, especially among the media and some of the fans that have been attending there. It has really stood out that not only does he look a step quicker, but it looks like he's maybe handling the puck a little bit better. Maybe his hockey IQ has developed a little bit more that has allowed him, a guy who's got such a big body, to really figure out how he can adjust to playing at such a high level for at least more consistently.
About Terry Pustin, another depth guy who I think has stood out, and he, again, he is exempt from waivers, so like O'Connor, like Smith, he's almost like he has to be that much better to make the roster than some of these other depth options. But something Sullivan likes to do, especially in training camp, is, you might not start with the line combinations we'll see throughout the year, but he'll start with pairs. pairs they didn't know works well together. Like Crosby and Gensel are together, or like Carter and Kapanen, he thought they can play well together. But, the third member of that line is going to be someone like a depth guy or a prospect. And so Puustinen is that guy on the top line with Crosby and Gensel right now. And that's not because Sullivan sees that as, your game one, opening lineup. But it's hard to, not notice that Puustinen really doesn't look out of place. And it obviously just his practices and scrimmages, but Puustinen, he looks like he could play there. And Puustinen, again, he'll probably start in Wilkes-Barre. Almost certainly start in Wilkes-Barre. But if he does come up, he could be a guy that when he does get, I'm not saying if, when he does get into the lineup this season, it could be in the top 6. Do you think he'd fit there?
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to his hockey IQ. I mean, both of us have talked about what a laser of a shot he has, especially a one-timer. But, his skating isn't significantly above average. His hands aren't crazy good or anything like that. So it makes you wonder, well, how does he keep making all these great plays? How does he keep ending up in the right spot all the time? And I really think that speaks to how high of a level he thinks the game. And, of course, Mike Sullivan's picking up on it, too, if he's putting him with Sidney Crosby and Jake Gensel right at the start of training camp.
Yeah, I mean, with Puustinen, that we saw that from the beginning when he was in Wilkes-Barre last year, his rookie season. And I think, sometimes you bring the guys over from Europe, especially the younger guys, and there's the question of how are they going to adapt to the North American game, the smaller ice, the speed of the game, the physicality, and maybe the added defensive responsibilities. And Puustinen, he was like an offense-first guy in Finland. And throughout the year, I asked JD Forrest, Wilkes-Barre's head coach, a couple of times, just like how Valtteri is handling, the defensive game down there. And he was confused, like why I was asking. He was like, I don't know if he had like a rap for that in Finland, but we haven't seen that at all here. He understands what they're trying to do there. I remember JD telling me like, I'm not afraid to put him out there in any situation. So that's encouraging to see. The last depth guy I want to touch on, Dustin Tokarski. I think we talked about him yesterday. They bring him in. He's Louis Domingue's replacement. He's the third goalie. But he's, they had 2 scrimmages so far. His team was in both of those scrimmages. It's 2 halves. Each goalie takes a half. He's gotten shutouts in both days. I don't think he was tested too much today, at least early on. Maybe towards the end of his time. But I mean, he had a couple of big saves on, like Chris Letang, P.O. Joseph. He had a big pad save on Brock McGinn in the final minute to. Keep the other team off the board. But, I mean, I don't know if he can push for the backup job. I did ask Sullivan that because, he's coming from the NHL. He was full-time, like a 1A, 1B in Buffalo last year, if you consider the Sabres an NHL team. But Sullivan, he kind of gives the answer you're expecting, like we're going to put together the best team, just going to give us the best chance to win, competitive lineup, all that. But, I mean, at the very least, he's an upgrade over Louis Domingue.
Yeah, if nothing else, this is a player who looks like he would have stopped that shot in Game 6 that ended up sending the Penguins-Rangers series to Game 7. He seems like the kind of guy that can at least handle himself. We don't necessarily expect him to force the issue, over Casey DeSmith for the backup role, but it is nice to have a guy like him available if either of Jarry or DeSmith go down. And I think that's really why Tokarski, I cannot speak today, why Tokarski ended up getting a one-way deal. And again, a one-way deal just has to do with the amount of money the player is paid out. It has nothing to do with whether they're allowed to be sent down or anything with their waivers or anything like that. But I do remember being a little caught off guard. I was like, why is this guy getting a one-way deal and just getting paid a flat rate? So that could be a reason why.
Yeah, I mean, Tokarski is a guy who I think he could have gotten a backup job on another team and getting NHL money. So, if he is going to, sign with the Penguins, you'd have to pay him what he could get as backup elsewhere. So I think that's good that, you get a guy who could be a backup for another team. But we have one more of these long days ahead of us. It's a long training camp ahead. We have one more of these 9 to 1:30 days tomorrow. We'll have your coverage throughout that and, the preseason. Just stay tuned for that on DK Pittsburgh Sports.